Hi everybody, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to look at how the coronavirus has affected labor markets, labor market health here in the United States. So in this first kind of shorter video, I'm going to explain some of the background information. People in my classes have likely had this material, but it's pretty foundational and it's particularly important during this rapidly changing situation because some of the ways that labor market statistics are calculated are highly dependent on when the calculations and the surveys took place. And so we need to be particular about how we're measuring things and when things are being measured. And that's a little bit what we're going to be looking at in this video and the next as well. So let's dive in here. This first bit is just looking at some definitions, how the Bureau of Labor Statistics classifies individuals as being employed, unemployed, labor force, non-labor force, things like that. So let's look at this. Again, these are coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS. Total population, this is just the total population within the United States, not necessarily a labor force measure, but to give you an idea, we have about 330 million people. That includes everybody, the kids, the elderly, the working population, everybody. But moving on to the labor force definitions of things, the adult population is everybody 16 and older, non-institutional population. So this the adult population is defined as individuals above 16 years in age. And so when we're talking about all the rest of the labor force statistics, we're talking about people 16 years older and above. Okay, the labor force, is anybody who's employed or unemployed. Employed or unemployed. And then we have those who are not in the labor force here, which we're going to get to in a second. But the adult population is composed of the labor force plus those not in the labor force. So we're just breaking this down piece by piece. Talking about who's employed, this is where it starts to get a little bit more technical. This is an individual who has spent some of the previous week working at a paid job. So an individual who has spent some of the previous week working at a paid job. Okay, this could be full-time, part-time. As long as they're getting paid, they're considered employed. And then the unemployed includes a few different, a couple different people. So it's an individual who is on temporary layoff. An individual who is on temporary layoff, or an individual who is not employed and so they have to both not be working, but they have to have been looking for work. So they are not employed and and was actively looking for work in the previous 4 weeks. And was actively looking for work in the previous 4 weeks. Okay, so those are the unemployed. Employed plus unemployed is the labor force. Anybody who does not fall into either of these categories is considered not in the labor force. So someone who fits into neither category above. Someone who fits into neither category above. Okay, think for a minute about what types of people these could be. If you want, you could pause and try to think about who was either not working in the last week or not looking for a job within the civilian population, adult population, 16 and older. So this is going to be full-time students who don't work, retirees, and discouraged workers. So discouraged workers are kind of a particular sign of weakness in the labor market. Like I said, up here, among the unemployed, they're not working, but they were looking for work. So if an individual is not working, but they've given up searching, they're a discouraged worker. So they've totally dropped out of the labor force. They're not even trying to get a job anymore. And so the number of discouraged workers, it can be a sign of very poor labor market health. Okay, and then moving on from there, we can talk about a couple. We can talk about the unemployment statistics by the entire labor market, or we can break it down into the prime age working population, which is sometimes done. So these are just people from ages 25 to 54. Okay, then this is essentially to look at just the people who are not likely to be full-time students, not likely to be retirees, and that can give you kind of an even better picture of labor market health. And then the underemployed, these are people who are technically employed, but they're part-time and want full-time jobs. And so that's something that can be measured as well. Okay, so that's some of the definitions. And then with those definitions, we can actually calculate the rates. And so I'll give some formulas here on how to calculate these. The unemployment rate is just the number unemployed. Well, actually here, let's the unemployment rate equals the number of people unemployed divided by the labor force. Labor force participation is equal to the labor force divided by the adult population. And the employment population ratio is equal to the number employed divided by the population. Okay, and so the unemployment rate is the primary labor market statistic that people talk about in the news. But these other two measurements are also very important and don't probably get enough coverage as they should. And so we can look at the previous recession and our recovery since then to kind of get an idea about how these different labor market statistics vary based on how you're calculating it. Okay, so here is what could be a little exercise. Actually, if you'd want to pause the video, you could pause the video and take those statistics up at the top and make the calculations, and then come back and see how you did. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. First, we're going to calculate the labor force, which is equal to the number employed plus number unemployed. That comes out to 156.87 plus 6.18. Okay, and that comes out to 163.05. Alright, the adult population is the labor force plus those not in the labor force. So that's 165.35 plus 95, 0.05 here, plus 95.35. That comes out to 258.4 million. So about 260 million in the labor force. And recall that's the total population is about 330 million. So the 70,000 people left are those those that are younger than 16, actually. Okay. So calculating the unemployment rate. This is the unemployed, 6.18, divided by the labor force. That comes out to 0.037, or actually, let's go ahead and do 0.379, which is equal to 3.79%. Okay, labor force participation rate. Labor force divided by the adult population. 163.5 over 258.4 for 63.27%. Start with these. Okay, and then the last one, the employment population ratio. This is equal to the number employed over the population. That comes out to 156.87 over 258.4 for 60.71%. Okay, so those are the calculations. And let's go ahead and throw these onto this table on the next page. Okay, February 2020 unemployment rate, 3.7%. labor force participation 63.27%, and 60.71% for employment population ratio. Okay, and so what I wanted to show with this table here is that we've got December 2007. That was the peak before the Great Recession that hit back in December of 2007. And then June 2009 was the trough, right before we started the expansion, so kind of the worst of it. Okay, so the unemployment rate before the recession started was 5%, went up to 9.5%, and then actually June of that year, or December of that year, it went up to 10%. Although the recession was technically over, unemployment got as high as 10% in December of 2009. But then we've had this steady expansion throughout the last decade, and we're down to 3.7%. We were down as low as 3.5%, which is the lowest that we've had in 50 years. We'll see that in a second. So on the unemployment side, unemployment rate, it looks like we've recovered very, very well. Okay, labor force participation rate. Generally, these second two, we want these to be higher. The labor force participation rate and the employment population ratio. We want higher numbers for these. We want lower numbers for the unemployment rate. And so as you can see, labor force participation, it dropped during the recession, as we would expect, but it's actually still lower than we were even at the trough. So labor force participation hasn't really improved by much. If anything, it's continued to decline. And the employment population ratio dropped during the recession, as we would expect. Recovered a bit, but still hasn't recovered fully to pre-recession levels. And so if you look at these second two measurements of the labor market, even before coronavirus hit, these second two still don't show as strong a labor market as the unemployment rate. Okay, so the unemployment rate recovered to even pre-recession and record low levels. Okay, but the labor force participation and the employment population ratio have not recovered to pre-recession levels. Okay, and then the labor force participation rate is even lower than the trough. Okay, so those are the numbers. Let's look at these time series based off of those numbers to finish up this first video, and then in the next video we'll dive into the more coronavirus related topics. Okay, so first graph here is the unemployment rate from 2000 until present, and here we have our 3.7, and actually it was even down to 3.5, and up here at the peak we had 10%. Down here at December 2007, right before the recession started, 5%. Okay, and so as you can see, during this last decade, we've been fairly constantly declining in the unemployment rate. And if you look here, we actually see that the current levels haven't been this low since back here in December of 1969. We had 3.5% unemployment, and we had 3.5% unemployment last fall and in January, I think. So, but still 3.7 is a very, very low unemployment rate historically. You can see it hasn't even dipped below 4 except for once there at the end of the 90s. So we have had historically low unemployment rates here, especially over the last year. Okay, so unemployment rate looks really good. Then we look at the labor force participation rate. Back here before the recession started, we were way up here. We've only barely started to increase below our low, which was around 2015. But you can see this kind of steady drop. We're still very much below where we were before the recession started, and let alone after. Okay, so labor force participation health, not nearly as strong as the unemployment rate. And same can be said for employment population ratio, although it's definitely improved during this expansion. It also has not reached pre-recession levels, and so big dips in the recessions, and then increasing in the expansions, but still not showing quite as strong a labor market as the unemployment rate suggests. Okay, and so that's just kind of going back to the idea that it's not enough to look at just one statistic. Different statistics measure different outcomes, and to get a broader sense of the labor market, you need to look at a few. And then again, you can break it down into age groups. You can look at underemployment. You can look at discouraged workers. There's all sorts of ways you can approach it, and all of that information can be found from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or FRED. So FRED is Federal Reserve Economic Data, and it has very nice interface to look at all sorts of economic statistics: unemployment, GDP, inflation, trade, budget stuff, everything. So those are two websites I would highly recommend. Okay, after this, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, but we're going to pick it back up on the next video, starting with the labor market consequences of coronavirus. I will see you then.